The envelope was still sealed when I found it. My wife had been gone for 11 days, and her lawyer had just called asking me to come in, said there was something I needed to see before the formal reading, said it couldn't wait. I told him I'd be there Thursday. What I didn't know was that someone had already been to that office before me. My name is Arthur Hobbs. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Dayton, Ohio, and another 6 years after that doing nothing much except tending the garden my wife Vera planted along the back fence and pretending I wasn't lonely. Vera and I were married 42 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday in the extended family, who kept a handwritten address book even after everyone switched to their phones, who made corn chowder from scratch every October without ever needing a recipe. She died of a stroke on a Tuesday morning in early November. She was in the kitchen. I was in the garage. By the time the ambulance came, she was already gone. Our daughter Christine flew in from Charlotte the same day. Our son-in-law Neil drove her to the airport himself, he said, because he didn't want her driving in that state. He showed up at the house 2 days later looking rumpled and serious and carrying a casserole dish from a restaurant, the price sticker still on the bottom. Christine was a wreck. She and her mother had talked on the phone every single morning. I mean every morning, without fail, for the past 12 years. That line going quiet was something she wasn't built to handle yet. I held her in the front hallway the night she arrived and felt her shake the way she used to shake when she was small and scared. And I thought, this is the only thing that matters right now. Being here. Being steady for her. Neil stood in the kitchen doorway with his hands in his pockets. He was always doing that, standing slightly outside whatever room the moment was happening in. The service was on a Saturday. 200 people, maybe more. Vera had more friends than I ever fully appreciated. Teachers from the elementary school where she'd volunteered, women from her book club, the entire congregation of the Methodist Church on Elmwood, neighbors we'd had for decades. It was a full church, and there wasn't a dry eye in the first 6 rows, and afterward, at the reception hall, Neil circulated the room with a glass of white wine, shaking hands, accepting condolences on behalf of the family as though he were the widower. I noticed it. I filed it away and said nothing. That night, after Christine fell asleep on the couch wrapped in Vera's old cardigan, and after Neil had driven back to the hotel, he said the pull-out couch was bad for his back. I sat at the kitchen table and went through the stack of mail that had accumulated over the past week. Bills, mostly. A few cards from people we hadn't seen in years. And at the bottom of the stack, a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Whitmore and Associates. The return address was Cincinnati. Not Dayton. Cincinnati. I stared at that envelope for a long time. Vera handled our finances. I know how that sounds. A retired teacher, 68 years old, didn't know where the money was, but that's the truth of it. She was better at it. She'd always been better at it. I trusted her completely, and she trusted me to stay out of it, and for 42 years that arrangement had worked fine. I knew we had a will. I knew we had savings. I knew we had the house and a modest retirement account and a small life insurance policy I'd taken out in my 40s and mostly forgotten about. I did not know there was a law firm in Cincinnati. I opened the letter. It was addressed to Vera. It referenced an account number I didn't recognize in a document described as a secondary transfer instrument and asked for her signature to complete a transaction that had been, in their words, initiated but not finalized. The letter was dated October 14th, 3 weeks before she died. I set it down. I picked it up again. I read it 4 more times and still didn't understand what it meant, but I understood enough to know I needed to understand more. Thursday morning, I drove to our own attorney, a man named Charles Webb who had handled our estate planning back when we redid the will 6 years ago. Charles is about my age, maybe a year or 2 older. The kind of man who keeps paper files on everything and still uses a rotary card holder on his desk. I trust him the way I trust people who haven't tried to impress me with anything. I brought the letter from Whitmore and Associates. Charles read it twice, and then he looked at me over his glasses in a way that told me before he said a word that something was wrong. "Arthur," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Did Vera ever mention establishing a secondary trust?" I said she hadn't. "Did she ever mention a transfer account? Any financial arrangement outside of what we set up together?" I said no. He set the letter down on the desk very carefully, the way you set something down when you're trying to decide what to do with it. Then he said, "I want you to go home, and I want you to look through her files, if she kept them, and I want you to find anything that references this account number or this firm. Don't call them yet. Just find what you can and bring it back to me." I asked him why. He said, "Because if this is what I think it might be, you're going to need documentation before you make any calls." I drove home with my hand steady on the wheel and my mind doing anything but. Vera kept her files in a cabinet in a small room off the kitchen that we'd always called the office, even though it was really just a room with a desk and a filing cabinet and a printer she'd bought in 2019. The cabinet had 4 drawers. The bottom drawer was the one she kept locked. I hadn't thought about that drawer in years. I found the key in the small ceramic dish on her dresser, the one where she kept things that didn't have a place: a button, 2 foreign coins, a tiny silver cross on a broken chain. The key was there, unremarkable, just another small object among small objects. The bottom drawer had hanging files going back 10 years. Tax documents mostly in the front, but near the back, behind a folder labeled "Iron Disurance," which I opened first and found was actually insurance, nothing unusual. There was a folder with no label at all. Inside it were bank statements I had never seen. Not our joint account, not the retirement account, a third account opened 6 years ago at a bank in Cincinnati. The statements went back to the beginning, and in those 6 years the balance had grown and then dropped and grown again, and then, in the last 14 months, had been drawn down steadily in transfers of between $8,000 and $15,000. Until the most recent statement, dated September, showed a remaining balance of less than $3,000. The account had started with $412,000. I sat on the floor of that office for a long time. I'm not sure how long. Long enough for the light coming through the window to shift. Long enough for the furnace to kick on and off again. I sat there on the thin carpet with those statements spread around me, and I thought about 42 years, and I thought about trust, and I thought about the letter from Whitmore and Associates asking for a signature to complete something that had been initiated but not finalized. And I tried to figure out what I was feeling. It wasn't grief. I already knew. This was something else, something colder. I called Christine that evening. She was back in Charlotte by then. Neil had wanted her home, said she needed to rest, said she couldn't keep putting off her own life. I told her I'd found some financial documents I didn't understand and asked if she knew anything about a separate account her mother had kept. There was a pause. "A savings account?" she said. "Like a personal one?" "Something like that," I said. "Did she ever mention it to you?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Dad, why don't I come back up this weekend? You shouldn't be going through all that alone." "I'm fine," I said. "I'm asking if you knew." "I didn't know anything about a separate account," she said. "I promise." I believed her. I still believe her. Christine has never been able to hide anything from me. It's one of the things Neil has always seemed vaguely irritated by. I went back to Charles the next morning with the folder. He looked through the statement slowly. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Arthur, I have to be straight with you. The amounts here, the timing, the firm in Cincinnati, this looks like money that was being moved out of the estate in a structured way, below the reporting threshold, consistently. That takes planning." "Planning," I said. "Someone knew what they were doing," he said, "or was being advised by someone who did." I asked him what that meant, practically speaking. He said it meant that when Vera died without completing that final transfer, there was still money sitting in that Cincinnati account. Nearly $300,000 had been sent somewhere, and the trail went to a financial services company. He said he needed a few days to look into it. He also said, quietly, that I should not mention any of this to anyone in the family until we knew more. I didn't ask him why. I think I already knew. That Saturday, Christine came back up. Neil came with her, which I hadn't expected. He brought his laptop, he said, because he was in the middle of a project and might need to check in on some things. He sat up at the kitchen table like he owned it, which was something he had a talent for, occupying space in a house that wasn't his. Christine and I walked in the garden in the afternoon. The beds were going dormant, the way they do in November. Vera had planted black-eyed Susans along the south fence in the spring, and they were all brown stalks now, but you could see where they'd been. Christine cried a little, quietly, the way she does. She's always cried that way, contained and private, ever since she was a girl. She said, I miss talking to her. I keep picking up my phone. I said, I know. She said, Neil thinks we should sell the house. He says it's too big for one person and the market is good right now. I looked at the brown stalks along the fence. Does he? I said. I told him this wasn't the time, she said. He said there's never a right time, but the market doesn't wait. I thought about that. I thought about what Charles had told me. I thought about the account in Cincinnati and the transfers and the company that had received most of the money. Christine, I said, does Neil handle your finances? She looked at me. He's good with money, she said. He works in asset management. Why? Just asking, I said. I called Charles Monday morning. He had news. The financial services company that had received the transfers was a small firm, not a bank. More of a private investment vehicle, the kind of thing that manages money for a handful of clients and doesn't advertise. It was registered in Delaware. The managing partner's name was listed in the corporate filings. The managing partner was Neil. I sat in my car in the driveway after he told me that. I thought about the first time Vera and I met Neil. He was 31, Christine was 28, they'd been dating about a year. He had that quality some men have, assured without being warm, smooth enough that you almost don't notice that nothing he says actually tells you anything about him. I'd had a feeling then, the kind you push away because you don't want to be the difficult father-in-law. I pushed it away. I kept pushing it for 11 years. I asked Charles how he wanted to proceed. He said we needed to establish the full scope first, how much had been transferred, whether any of it had been commingled, whether Vera had signed the initial documents willingly or under some kind of pressure. He said we needed to be careful and methodical. He said the worst thing I could do right now was confront anyone before we had a complete picture. I said I understood. I went back into the house and made dinner. Neil was at the kitchen table with his laptop doing whatever he does. I made pasta with the jarred sauce I've been using since Vera died because I never learned to cook the way she did. Neil said it smelled good. I said thank you. I put a plate in front of him and watched him eat and thought about what I knew. Over the next 3 weeks, Charles worked with a forensic accountant named Davison, a quiet woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in a way that made complex things feel simple. She traced the transfers. The picture that emerged was this. 6 years ago, Neil had introduced Vera to a private wealth management opportunity. Vera, who had always been careful with money, had been persuaded to move a portion of her savings, her own money, accumulated over decades of careful living, into this vehicle. Davison believed, based on the communication records Charles had been able to subpoena, that Vera had not fully understood the nature of the arrangement. The documents she'd signed described it as a managed account. In practice, it was a pass-through to a company Neil controlled. Most of the money had been invested and reinvested in ways designed to obscure the original source. Some of it had funded a real estate project in Columbus. Some of it appeared in the operating accounts of a consulting firm also connected to Neil. The $300,000 still sitting in Cincinnati. That was what the October letter was trying to finalize the transfer of. Vera had died before she signed it. That was the only reason any of this was still traceable. Davison said without inflection, if she had signed that document, this would have been very difficult to unwind. I thought about Vera in October. She had seemed tired, more tired than usual. She'd been forgetful in small ways, left the stove on twice, misplaced her reading glasses constantly. I'd thought it was just age. I'd thought we were just getting older. I thought about whether she had been tired because she was starting to understand what she had done, what she had been led into. I thought about her in the kitchen on that Tuesday morning, alone, and I thought about the stroke, and I told myself to stop because that road leads somewhere I couldn't come back from. I called Christine. I told her I needed her to come to Dayton, alone. I told her it was important and that I needed her to trust me and not tell Neil she was coming until she was already on the road. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How bad is it?" I said, "Come see Charles with me." She drove up the next morning. She sat across from Charles and Davison and listened for 2 hours. I watched her face. I watched her go still, the way people go still, when the thing they're hearing is too large to react to all at once. She asked 3 questions. Did Mom know? Did she try to get the money back? Is there anything left? Charles answered as carefully as he could. Vera likely knew toward the end that something was wrong, but the documents she'd signed had been structured to make unwinding the arrangement seem risky to her own interests. There were emails recovered from her account in which she'd asked Neil questions about her account balance. His responses had been reassuring and vague. As for what was left, the $300,000 in Cincinnati, plus whatever could be recovered through legal action. Christine sat very still after that. Then she said, in a voice I hadn't heard since she was a teenager, trying not to show how hurt she was, "How long has he been doing this?" Charles said he believed it began shortly after they got married. She drove back to Charlotte that afternoon. She didn't call Neil to say she was coming. She called me from the driveway of her own house to say she was home. I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "No, but I'm going to be." What happened next took months, not days. That's the part that no one tells you when you imagine justice, that it's slow, it's methodical. It's documents and depositions and conference calls with attorneys and a lot of sitting in Charles's office watching Davison lay out pages on the conference table. Christine filed for divorce in December. Neil, who had clearly not seen that coming, because men like Neil never believe the people around them are paying attention, hired a lawyer and initially denied everything. The corporate structure, he claimed, was a legitimate investment vehicle. The transfers were consensual. Vera had been a willing participant. Davison put 37 pages in front of his lawyer that made that position untenable. The civil case settled in March. The terms required Neil to return all recoverable funds and surrender the Columbus property. His consulting firm was dissolved. His asset management license was under review by the state regulatory board. On the morning the settlement was signed, I drove to the cemetery. The ground was still frozen. I'd brought the small pot of forest daffodils Christine had sent for Valentine's Day, the kind that come in a plastic pot from the grocery store and feel almost silly next to a headstone, but Vera had always loved daffodils. I set them down at the base of the stone and stood there for a while without saying anything. I had things I wanted to say. I didn't say them. I just stood. What I felt standing there was not simple. It wasn't clean. There was anger in it. I won't pretend otherwise. There was grief, the regular kind that hasn't gone anywhere. There was something that might have been relief or might have been the particular exhaustion that comes when you've been holding something heavy for a long time and finally put it down. And there was this. I thought about the unlabeled folder in the bottom drawer. I thought about a woman who had been too proud or too ashamed or too afraid of what it would do to her daughter's marriage to come to me with what she was starting to suspect. I thought about how she must have felt in those last months, carrying it. And I thought, I wish you had told me. I would have helped you carry it. I would have figured it out with you. Christine is back in Dayton now. She's staying in the house through the spring, using the small room off the kitchen as an office for the consulting work she started doing on her own. She has her mother's habit of being up early, and sometimes when I come downstairs at 6 in the morning, she's already at the desk with her coffee, and it stops me in the doorway in a way I'm not prepared for, that specific silhouette, that specific stillness. I started cooking more. Not well, but more. Vera's corn chowder is beyond me. I've tried it twice and it doesn't taste right. But I made a pot roast last Sunday that Christine said was actually good, and I think she meant it. The daffodils on the dresser are still going. Christine bought a second pot last week and set it on the kitchen windowsill where the light is better, where they'll last longer. I don't know what comes next. I know the house isn't too big for one person. I know the market can wait. I know that when someone tries to tell you that grief is a reason to move quickly, to sell, to sign, to finalize, that urgency isn't about you. And I know that some things locked away in the bottom drawer are waiting to be found. They always are. The locked drawer was always there. I walked past it for 6 years and never once thought to ask what was in it. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the betrayal, not the money, but the ordinary mornings when I could have asked and didn't. Trust is a good thing, but trust without paying attention isn't love, it's just looking away. Neil wasn't a monster who appeared out of nowhere. He was a man who read a situation carefully and made a calculation that no one would check, that grief would create an opening, that the people around him were too busy loving each other to look at the fine print. And for a long time, he was right. What he didn't calculate was Vera's instinct to keep records. He didn't calculate Charles. He didn't calculate that a retired history teacher with nothing but time on his hands would sit down and read every page in a dusty filing cabinet until something didn't add up. He underestimated what patience looks like when it has a reason. I think about what it took to get from that kitchen table, where I sat with those statements around me on the floor, to the morning the settlement was signed. There was nothing heroic about it. I wasn't brave in any particular moment. I just kept making the next right call. Bring it to Charles. Don't confront anyone yet. Wait for Davison to finish the pages. What people call doing the right thing is usually just refusing to take the easy shortcut, over and over, until the truth has enough room to stand on its own. Christine had to do her version of that too. She had to sit in Charles's office and hear something that dismantled 11 years of her life. And then she had to drive 4 hours home alone and walk into her own house and make a decision. She made the right one. I can't say it surprised me. She has her mother's spine, always did, but I want to say it out loud anyway because it cost her something real, and the cost of doing right never stops being real just because it was the correct choice. What I've been turning over lately is this. Vera was smart. She was one of the sharpest people I've ever known, and she still got led somewhere she didn't intend to go because someone she trusted used her care for her daughter against her. The intelligence that matters isn't just knowing things. It's knowing when to slow down and ask the uncomfortable question. It's being willing to see something clearly even when what you see is going to hurt. Vera got close to that, toward the end. I think she was starting to ask the questions. I think the October letter scared her enough to finally worn out. She just ran out of time. I don't say any of this to blame her. I say it because I've had to apply it to myself. Had to ask where I looked away, where I let things be handled without understanding them, where I confused ease with trust. The answer to those questions isn't comfortable, but it's useful. and useful is what I've got. The daffodils are still on the windowsill. Christine bought another pot. We don't say much about what happened. Not directly, not yet, but we have dinner most Sundays now, and she's learning her mother's corn chowder recipe from a card I found tucked inside the old Better Homes cookbook. Neither of us gets it quite right, but we keep trying, which is the thing. Some debts get repaid, some locks get opened, and some things you thought were gone have a way of coming back around if you're steady enough to wait.